Well, good morning, everybody. Today we have a very, very special guest, my good friend, Pastor Joel Sommers from Southeast Portland. He is the pastor at Access Covenant Church. Pastor Joel, thank you for being here today. Welcome, welcome.
Obi, it's great to be here. I'm really excited about what you're doing at Ecclesia Clear Lake, and it's always fun to hang out, man. So thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely, y'all. Pastor Joel has been a big part of my life, especially the past 10 years. We've collaborated a few times. I've been able to speak at his church. He has preached at some of my youth camps in the past. But I think more than anything, God's used him to breathe life into my life, into my bones, so to speak. And so really excited about this conversation. But Pastor Joel, I told you before that our church is in this season of discernment. We are intentionally praying and dreaming about what it means to be the local church in our bodies, in this location, and at this time. And so what I've decided to do is start interviewing a few pastors around the country that I really respect to get some of their input and their feedback, and so that we can kind of sit under their pastoral leadership and be shaped by them. And that's why I asked you today. All right. Well, the first question I have for you is I'd love for you to tell us, what is your ministry context and why is it important to consider context when thinking about the life of the church?
Yeah. So, I'll begin. You already mentioned I'm in the great state of Oregon, and my family and I have lived here for 15 years now in our neighborhood in Southeast Portland. My wife and I were going for a walk in our neighborhood the other day, and we're just looking how Oregon is just beautiful. Western Oregon in the spring. I mean, I'm a little jealous of your polo shirt right now because it's about 43 degrees and rainy today. So that's not great, but the blooming flowers, the light, coming under a canopy of gray and lighting up the neighborhood is just magical. So we're really grateful for all the beauty that we've gotten to live with here. And it's been a great place to raise the boys. State of Oregon has a lot to offer, but we also have some unfortunate realities in our history, right? We're the only state in the union to actually make it illegal for Black people to live in our state. We did that in 1859. And to this day, we have a Black population that's only 3% of the state. And so if you're in Oregon and you're thinking, well, where are the Black folks? Well, that was something that was structural, something that was intentional. Like we were designed as a sort of white utopia. City of Portland essentially follows that trend. And folks aren't, I've lived on the West Coast my whole life. And, forgive me, folks, but us like West Coast lefties, we love to shade the South and talk about how bad stuff is in the South. But family, Portland, Oregon had a huge Klan presence in the 1920s. We were a Klan city. So many, I used to have the numbers memorized, but it was a startling number of men were enrolled Klan members. And, even as folks make some adjustments, those folks are still here. In our neighborhood in Southeast Portland, when I moved in, my Puerto Rican friend he goes, this was a Klan neighborhood. I'm like, oh, good to know. And so even as it changes, there's still a legacy there and some attitudes and realities that probably persist. So that's a little bit of our story. The particular neighborhood where my family and I live and do church, which is all, we're actually an extremely local church. I live 0.8 miles from our sanctuary here where we worship. Most of the church lives within 2 miles of this building right here. This is Clackamas land. The Clackamas Nation has mostly been relocated at this time. They don't have a formal presence here in this territory, but they've mostly been moved to a reservation in Central Oregon, those that remain. So that's where we are. Our specific neighborhood has traditionally been a lower income neighborhood. With some of the problems that come with that. Meth traffic was pretty significant. And when I moved in 2007, somebody said, oh, that's a bad neighborhood. But we had actually sort of looked at some of the the numbers and the trends, and we had walked through the neighborhood before purchasing our home, and we thought, no, this is actually, it's a humble neighborhood, but it's very calm. And I told our friend George Lee, you remember George? We went to seminary together. He was living in the neighborhood at the time. I said, George, I think we're going to gentrify this neighborhood. And he said, Joel, we're minorities. And I was like, no, George, we can still gentrify it just by bringing our education and kind of our way of doing things. And honestly, we did. Within about 10 years of moving here, this neighborhood was the 20th hottest neighborhood for real estate in the nation. So it blew up, and we're absolutely seeing a transformation. Old homes getting torn down, condos going up. San Francisco vibes, for those of you who've been to San Francisco, just starting to feel that way. So now we're in a significant gentrification process, and that's bringing a lot of change.
Yeah. Well, the second question I'm really excited to ask you about, because I was reading your website just earlier today, and you mentioned there's 3 really important things to your church community. You say Jesus, justice, and Southeast Portland. And you've spoken about that just now, that Southeast Portland is your very local church. And so this particular question is, what is your understanding of theology of place, and why does it matter?
Yeah. I think all good Christian theology finds its home in Jesus, right? Like we can spread out here and there. Well, this verse, and I'll do some of that. But when they ask Jesus what matters, he says, love God and love your neighbor. What if he means our actual neighbor, right? What if he means the people that are around us? Which is an interesting challenge because, depending on your situation, maybe you're getting home late from work, maybe you're leaving the house early, you're tired when you're at home. What does it look like to build a connection with those folks? But that's, I think in terms of Jesus commanding us to love our neighbor, it's important to lean into those questions. The other thing I think about is Jesus being Emmanuel, the God who is with us. And I think in terms of my own spirituality and my relationship with God, I need God to meet with me where I am, as I am. And I think that means, seeking him in the place where I live. And the unfortunate reality of, spirituality is that sometimes we use it as an escape from the place that we are. Look at the life of Jesus. I don't see him leading us to escape. I see him leading us to be really, truly present, embodied, as you might say, at Clear Lake, to be embodied and to be present where we are. So those are 2 things from the life of Jesus. And then as I think about it, sort of for the church as a people, for the people of God as a people, I think of Jeremiah 29 and the exiles in Babylon. I think of the ways that they were, just so over being in Babylon. There's so many problems. The Babylonians didn't get their culture, had inflicted harm on their people, didn't get their theology. The Babylonians were giving their children bad messages about who God is and all this stuff. And they wanted to get out of there. And yet the Holy Spirit, sort of flipped it on them and said, actually, I want you to bless this place as much as you possibly can. And I want you to recognize that you're not going to thrive by separating yourself from your neighbors. You will only thrive if your neighbors thrive. And so you've got to seek their blessing. And so for me, that has just Yeah, those are convictions that I have. I think when I stray from those things, my own spirituality sort of loses some of its vibrance. So I need Jesus to meet with me where I am, as I am, and those are some touch points that help me.
The final question I have for you has to do with the church. What is the role of the church in the world, and why does the local church matter?
Yeah, um, I think um, I think the church is the keeper of the story.
Mm,
So I think our technological world, our market-driven world, we are really obsessed with the questions of what and how, and we're always trying to get better, do more faster, bring the next innovation, all that stuff. I think that stuff is good and important, but I think the role of the church is to tell us who and why. And in our story, in our sacred story, and what the scripture gives us, we are told who God is and who we are, and we're told why God's attitude towards us is the way it is. And I think when we answer those questions, that will start to inform the what, and that will
mm,
inform the how. um, so I remember hearing from one neighbor. He said, I don't want to take my son to church because I don't want them forcing religion down his throat.
mm.
He had a bad experience. That's fair. But I was like, man, there are multi-billion-dollar corporations studying your son right now to influence his mind as much as possible and to extract as much of his time, energy, and money as possible, right? So I don't, maybe we're scared of the wrong things. we need a counter narrative that will tell us how to live, that will, in essence, protect us, and I think liberate us from all the other stories that are competing to essentially influence and even control our lives. So why does that matter locally? I think rather than presenting that story in a disconnected way, rather than streaming it in exclusively, um, our neighbors will experience that when we actually have relationship with them.
Mhm.
And so when there's a crisis in the neighborhood and they know that you are the keeper of the story, they are going to look to you. And I think it's critical certainly for our witness as people who want others to be in relationship with Jesus Christ. I also think it's critical for the benefit of the place that we live. Portland, like other urban areas around the country, we've got a problem with shootings right now. So people in our neighborhood are doing a lot of shooting. Thankfully, people aren't getting hurt, but there's a lot of just random shooting that goes on. And something that we've had to do in the last few months is to connect neighbors with different churches to create basically a network of awareness. We've done some things, putting up chains in certain parking lots so that they can't be used for drive-bys, putting up traffic cones and barrels to, again, reduce the incidence of drive-bys. And so our ability to be a sort of connective tissue, which I think is another role that the church can play locally, to be a connective tissue between people and communities who don't know each other and start to get the right people talking to one another. So yeah, those are a couple things.
That's good. You're talking about like a very physical manifestation of the spiritual realities of love, joy, peace, of God's shalom.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it's interesting to hear you say this. You're very much describing you just said earlier that Jesus meets you where you are with what you have, or something like that. And in essence, that's kind of what you're doing. That it sounds like you're doing in your community. You're an extension
Mm.
of the presence of God, or God is using you to help shine His light in those spaces. And it's very tangible, very physical, very real. And so that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course, man. I hope that's the case. And I do hope, I think for myself, I grew up commuting to a mega church, right? So we would cross two towns to get to the church that had, the best music, best teaching, best kids program. And I had some great experiences there, certainly grew in the faith, baptized, etc. But then I would go back to my neighborhood, which didn't look like that church. And I would go to my super overcrowded, diverse high school, which didn't look like that church. And I think for me, getting to be part of this community and this church has been a way of putting some of those pieces back together. And I kind of suspect that a theology of place and local neighborhood embodiment of ministry will put some of that together and give individuals a richer experience of Jesus. So